hitting record.
41 Regional History Forum with an historical note. While there have been a few programs in the 42-year history of the series that took place outside in the 1859 Courthouse building, there have been only 2 years when all the programs happened elsewhere. The first year was 1997, the year after the 1996 flood, when the building was being installed on its new site, the seventh and, we hope, the final time the courthouse was moved. This year, while COVID-19 closures were in effect, is the second year that the entire series goes on away from the building. In case you haven't visited, the old courthouse features the sheriff's office and jail, and the upstairs courtroom, where we usually meet in the Regional History Forum. The building served not only as headquarters for Wasco County, but also as the Dallas City Hall. The original courthouse tells the story of our town's early governmental history. It was restored and stays open thanks to the generosity of members and donors. History Forum programs have always been free. In normal years, we pass a soft around for voluntary contributions. If we can't do that this year, we invite you to help us continue these programs and open the doors again as soon as we can with your donation to the original Courthouse Preservation Corporation. Thank you in advance. And now a word from our president.
Thank you, Roger. I'd also like to welcome everyone and thank you for your interest in our history forums. Karl Vercouteren, our speaker today, was an early supporter of the original Wasco County Courthouse. In fact, since the year after the courthouse was restored. And he's been involved in recruiting and presenting history forum programs since we started doing them 42 years ago. Karl learned about the interactive map project commemorating the centennial of women's suffrage at the first program in this series a year ago. The speaker challenged local historians to come up with people and events that led up to the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920 and put them on the map. And luckily for us, Karl did. Thank you, Karl. We're looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Darcy. Okay, here's the first slide. Let's begin. This is the map of the National Vote for Women Trail. If you look closely, you'll see that the Dalles is on this map. Let me tell you how that came about. Every February for over 40 years, we've been doing these history programs every Saturday at the original courthouse. It was suggested in the fall of 2019 that we should do a program on the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. That's also known as the franchise or the right to vote. 1920 was the promising year for women's suffrage. This cartoon from a Minneapolis newspaper appeared in the Dalles Chronicle on February the 7th, 1920. There you see that initiatives for women's voting rights were happening in many nations all around the world. And it happened right here in the United States of America. The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution became law of the land on August 26, 1920, the result of the suffrage movement that began some 80 years before, way back in the 1840s. We were fortunate to sign up Janice Dilg to present a program on the 19th Amendment centennial. She's a historian from Portland who coordinated the statewide observance that also tied in with the national centennial observance. The interactive map is part of the national celebration. And back in February 2020, Janice challenged us to get on the map. That's done by filling out a form that asks for a specific location, a location that has to do with a person or an event that was part of that journey toward equal voting rights. And then for each place, it asks for a description of 85 words or less. Getting on the map was a wonderful idea, but who would do the work? People from original Courthouse, people from the Wasco County Historical Society, people from Fort Dalles Museum. All of us were interested, but all of us were busy with other projects. I had started writing blogs for the Art Center about the buildings on the All Together the Dalles mural, one blog a week starting in November 2019. That was enough on my plate. But then came COVID-19. March 2020 brought with it more time to write blogs. But then the folks who were posting the blogs each week on the website, they took a break from posting them. I kept on writing the blogs, but I also remembered the National Vote for Women Trail Project. So I checked in with Janice Dilg and proposed a few local sites that deserved to go up on her map. It wasn't hard coming up with people and events. Some of it took research that wasn't very easy when the libraries were closed, but it was a learning experience. And I thank folks like Mary Davis, Susan Buse, Jan Leininger, and Denise Bokum, and a whole bunch of others for helping me pin down information. Each of the little circles on the map takes you to details about people or events. When you click on a circle, a white information box like the one you see on the screen that comes up on the map. Or you can click on a box above the map and that takes you to the narrative table. And the narrative table will give you all of the information from the entry forms and they are listed by state. The goal was to top 2,000 of the little circles on the map by August the 26th. The real challenge, though, was to limit the write-ups to 85 words. But I'm going to share the ones that I submitted, and I'll try to keep the commentary between them as brief as possible. Our first stop, the corner of First and Union Streets in the Dalles. Susan B. Anthony's speaking tour of 1871 took her to Walla Walla with a stopover in the Dalles. She arrived on Monday, September 18th. She and Abigail Scott Dunaway left the steamboat and stayed at the Umatilla House. 100 people were waiting to hear the national suffrage leader that evening. The next morning, the travelers took the Portage Railroad to Celilo and then the Upper River Steamboat to Points East. They returned on Monday, September 25th. That time they stayed at the Empire Hotel, which was just a block down First Street from the Umatilla House. And Susan's diary entry for that evening said, had a very small audience. Susan B. Anthony was a national leader of the suffrage movement from its beginnings in the 1840s, right up to her death in 1906. She visited Oregon 3 times. This was the first. Her Oregon counterpart, the leader of the cause in Oregon for many years, was Abigail Scott Dunaway. And it's usually said in describing Abigail that her brother was Harvey Scott, the editor of the Oregonian, who was adamantly opposed to women's suffrage. This didn't get on the map because it's really more of local interest than for the national map, but Susan's datebook tells us that their trip back to Portland involved pleasant company. What a wide-ranging conversation that must have been between pioneer national suffragist Susan B. Anthony, Oregon's mother of equal suffrage, Abigail Scott Dunaway, and the Reverend Thomas Condon, father of Oregon geology. They must have been talking about science, religion, abolition, suffrage, mutual acquaintances, the wonders of the Columbia River Gorge, and perhaps social Darwinism. The three had much to talk about. Fast forward to 1905. We click on the corner of First and Madison Streets. That's kitty corner across from the cherry growers. That's the site of the old Oregon Rail and Navigation passenger station, forerunner to Union Pacific. And it was the station prior to the later one that some of you will remember, the one on the Mill Creek Lagoon landfill, where the post office is located now. Susan and Abigail are subjects of another map entry. It's a parking lot now, but back in 1905, this was our passenger station. Thanks to Jerry Tanquist for this photo. Here's the story that puts the old station on the map. 3 special train cars left Chicago on June 23, 1905, heading for the National Suffrage Convention in Portland. Susan B. Anthony, Carrie Chapman Catt, Dr. Anna Shaw, and other national leaders were greeted by suffragists all along the route. On Monday morning, June 26th, the special train entered the magnificent scenery along the Columbia River Gorge. At the Dalles, they were met by Abigail Scott Duniway and a party of friends. This is the site of the old ORNN passenger station where Oregon Friends met the contingent from the east. The combined group traveled through the gorge together. It was Susan's 3rd visit to Oregon. The 2 friends were older now. Susan would die within the year. Abigail would live to vote in Oregon, but she would die before the 19th Amendment passed. Abigail worked hard to get the national meeting to Portland in 1905. It coincided with the World's Fair. Suffragists made their presence known at the fair. But that didn't sit too well with Abigail. Abigail believed in what she called the still hunt approach. The still hunt was quiet conversations to win over the men who were the decision makers. But a new generation of suffrage leaders leaned toward the campaign style, public speaking and demonstrating to get the point across. After the 3rd vote fell short in 1906, Abigail replaced young upstarts with her old friends in the leadership of the Oregon State Equal Suffrage Association. Now I mixed up pages. So here we have one of those old friends, Elizabeth Laughlin Lord. She was elected vice president at large of the Oregon State Equal Suffrage Association. Elizabeth came from an early pioneer family in the Dalles. She was a leader in the Cirrhosis Club and also in the Old Fort Dalles Historical Society. She organized the local equal suffrage group, and she was a founding member of the Christian Science Church. Her husband, Wentworth Lord, expanded the Wasco warehouse into the milling business and brought hydropower to the Dalles. So we click on the circle above the first bluff on Court Street. And here's the 85 words about it. The home of Wentworth and Elizabeth Laughlin Lord stood here. Abigail Scott Duniway said of them, the Lords helped to finance the empty treasury of the Equal Suffrage Association. Elizabeth's beautiful residence was a rendezvous for men and women of literary attainment who enjoyed the unbounded hospitality of her artistic home. She led local civic groups, was vice president of the Oregon State Equal Suffrage Association in 1912, and had her daughter bequeath her house on the bluff to be put to a civic use. In the 1960s, the library located on this site. After all the false starts, elections lost by a thin margin, the stage was set for equal suffrage victory in 1912. The initiative petition was in effect. Abigail Scott Duniway was in poor health, and that gave the proponents of the Hurrah campaign free rein. Harvey Scott had died, and Oregon's largest circulation newspaper now supported women's vote, and equal suffrage had the support of the state Grange and of labor. This circle is on the southwest corner of 2nd and Federal Streets. The current building there is only 1 story tall, but the vote block back in 1912 had a 2nd floor. Business sessions of the Oregon Federation of Labor Convention were held January 15th through 18th, 1912, at the Knights of Pythias Hall upstairs in the vote block. The 2nd story was destroyed by a fire in 1962. W.M. Davis presented a resolution favoring women's suffrage that was adopted unanimously. Officers of the Federation asked locals to support the measure and to work in its favor. Governor Oswald West congratulated the Federation the next evening in a public address. There was also opposition to women voting. This is an ad that appeared in the Chronicle. Saloon keepers, brewers, and distillers feared that prohibition would come with women voters, and it did. Others, including many women, just wanted to keep the status quo. It was blossom time in the Hood River Valley on the afternoon of April 19th, 1912. An automobile decorated with Votes for Women signs carried suffrage leaders on a tour of the valley. Activists gathered that evening at the Commercial Club in downtown Hood River to hear Mrs. Sarah E. Comerford of Portland. It was primary election day, so the suffragists attracted a crowd by announcing election returns by stereopticon, magic lantern slides. The College Equal Suffrage League organized in 1912. They were definitely an activist group, but they wisely named Abigail Scott Duniway as their honorary president. They were generally college graduates, but they also engaged young women undergraduates to join their campaign during the summer break. And notice the name of the first organizer at the bottom of the page. Her name will come up often, beginning with her visit to Heppner. And keep that slide up there. We're pointing at Heppner now. The College Equal Suffrage League organizer, Sarah Bard Field Ergut, visited Morrow County September 19th, 1912. She came to Heppner unannounced, but she gathered an audience in a street meeting in front of the post office. The weekly newspaper reported, "She is a mighty bright little woman, well posted on her subject and a good speaker. She discovered a strong sentiment in favor of votes for women at this place." That's Sarah on the right. Sarah Bard Field was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1882. Her parents were strict Baptists. The family moved to Detroit, and there at age 18, she married the much older Baptist minister, Albert Ergut. The couple went to Burma as missionaries. It was an experience that awakened Sarah's sense of social justice. Upon their return to the United States, they spent several years in Cleveland, Ohio. Then in 1910, Ergut was called to a parish in Portland. Over the next 10 years, Sarah involved herself in the suffrage movement. The campaign was ramping up in the Dalles. The September 23rd Chronicle reported the formation of the Equal Suffrage Association of the Dalles. 26 representative women, many of them from the Cirrhosis Club. They met at Elizabeth Lord's house up there on the Court Street bluff. They named her president, an early pioneer, Camilla Donnell, now in her 85th year, honorary president. Camilla's daughter, Lulu Crandall, was on the executive committee, and Sylvia Thompson was secretary. They joined new suffrage organizations that were cropping up all over the state, preparing for a busy fall. Just a few days later at 3rd and Oak Streets, Hood River, once again a familiar name. Mrs. Sarah Bard Field Ergut began a week in the Mid-Columbia area with a very able and eloquent appeal. The afternoon and evening of Monday, September 30th, 1912. Meetings took place at the Commercial Club, which was also the site of a gathering November the 7th, the Saturday just before the election. On that occasion, Mrs. Charlotte Perkins Gilman presented cool, clear arguments, presented them to a large audience, many of which were men. Suffrage carried in Hood River County 766 to 617. But Sarah had a busy week back in September. Hood River, September 30th, then on to Mosier the next day. Some of our landmarks are long gone. Others have totally changed from what was there back in 1912. But here in Mosier, the library looks exactly the same today as it did 108 years ago. Here's the 85-word description. Mrs. Sarah Bard Field Ergut spoke to an appreciative audience in the village of Mosier, October the 1st, 1912. It was reported that she made a number of converts to women's suffrage. The open-air meeting took place on the street in front of the library. Sarah distributed literature at the county fair and gave several speeches for the College Equal Suffrage League in the Mid-Columbia area that week in preparation for the November election. Now we are at that big block that includes Kramer Field, the Little League Fields, Head Start, Columbia Basin Nursing Home, and the old county sheds. The 40-acre plot occupied by the Wasco County Hospital and Fairgrounds was busier than ever, October 1 through 4, 1912. That year, Big Rodeo came to the annual Wasco and Hood River County District Fair. The College Equal Suffrage League also came to the fair. That year, the 20 volunteers and 2 staff members of the league fanned out all over Oregon to the state fair and to every district and county fair, offering addresses, information, and literature. The daily chronicles were full of ads and articles about the fair, no mention of the suffragist visitors. Local fairs ended with World War I and with the influenza pandemic. Big Rodeo moved on to Pendleton, and the little fair down at Ty Valley became the county fair. On up to Fort Dalles, still during Fair Week. About 150 teachers gathered on the lawn of the surgeon's quarters on October 3rd, 1912. They came from city schools and from one-room country schools throughout Wasco and Sherman counties. They came from the annual Teachers Institute to a reception hosted by the Old Fort Dalles Historical Society. A talk on equal suffrage was given by Mrs. Sarah Ergut. She was organizer representing the College Equal Suffrage League. Inside the museum today, you can see Elizabeth Lord's suffrage certificate, also the hat that the suffragists used to wear. The College Suffrage League distributed thousands of pieces of literature, sent many, many letters, and sent organizers throughout Oregon in 1912. They were represented at every fair, including state fair and the county fairs. Condon hosted a tri-county fair for Gillum, Sherman, and Wheeler counties in 1912. Headquarters were established, addresses were made, information was given, and literature was distributed. It was noticed by the suffrage workers that their documents were really wanted and were taken home and read. To the south, the Tri-County Fair for Jefferson, Deschutes, and Crook counties was held at Prineville, October 16th through 19th. Margaret Sharp was the college suffrage league organizer there. She planned for a mammoth kickoff suffrage meeting on the eve of the fair with speakers C.E.S. Wood, William Hanley, and Dr. A.A. Morrison. The Equal Suffrage Association of the Dalles held a large public meeting October 30th, practically the eve of the election. It was held at the Vote Opera House. The speaker was Dr. C.H. Chapman, former president of the University of Oregon, and in 1912 he was associate editor of the Portland Oregonian. He was prepared to give many forceful, logical, and convincing reasons why women should have the ballot. Local suffragists were disappointed when the votes were counted. Those in favor of suffrage garnered 44% of the vote, while those against pulled ahead with 56% in Wasco County. But on the state level, victory! All the work of the Hurrah campaign paid off. Abigail Scott Duniway died in 1915, but by that time, only 10 states, mostly in the West, had voted the franchise for women. It became apparent that the right to vote needed to be secured nationwide. Sarah Bard Field Ergut met Charles Erskine Scott Wood during the campaign. Erskine Wood was a Renaissance man, one of the most interesting men in Oregon history. He was a soldier, lawyer, poet, painter, raconteur, bon vivant, politician, and he was a free spirit. Sarah was married to Baptist minister Albert Ergut through the 1912 campaign, but during that time she fell in love with C.E.S. Wood. Their love affair shocked many Portlanders, but Sarah was undeterred by conventional moralities. She divorced and dropped the name Ergut after that. With victory won in Oregon, Sarah Bard Field joined the Congressional Union, later the National Women's Party, and she continued her activism on the national level. Sarah continued to fight for suffrage. In 1915, she joined these two women to drive a petition containing 500,000 signatures from California to Washington, D.C. Now take a look at this vehicle and just imagine the condition of roads back in 1915. There were many stops and many speeches along the way. The petition asked for suffrage and was presented in person to President Woodrow Wilson. Sarah and Erskine moved to San Francisco in 1918, where they both became part of the literary scene, and they eventually married. But back in the Dalles, there are more sites for the map. The first stop is 610 Court Street, across from the old Court Street School. Just down the hill from the library, where Elizabeth Laughlin Lord and her husband lived, this little bungalow still stands. It's the house next to the alley. This was the former home of Sylvia Thompson and her husband. Sylvia was another one of the women who learned civic leadership and accomplished so much good in the community through the Cirrhosis Club. Sylvia McGuire was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1876. She moved to Indiana, then to Portland, where she married Alexander Thompson. She was the first woman to be a member of the Democratic National Campaign Committee in United States history. Sylvia ran for public office herself 16 years after moving to Oregon. The year was 1916. She won her first race to represent Oregon's 29th district in Oregon's House of Representatives. The district was comprised of Wasco and Hood River counties. That made her the third woman to serve in the Oregon legislature. She would serve 3 terms in the legislature through 1922. Hotel Dalles at the corner of 2nd and Liberty Street, where the Dalles Inn is located now. It was 4 years after Oregon women gained the right to vote and 4 years before Representative Thompson introduced the resolution to ratify the 19th Amendment. Sylvia Thompson won her first term as legislator earlier that month. On November 28th, 1916, she addressed a well-attended meeting of the Cirrhosis Club at Hotel Dalles, and her topic was Woman and Her New Citizenship. Her message: universal women's suffrage is bound to come. The tide is restless, and the sooner it comes, the better for humanity. Universal suffrage did come to the United States of America in 1920. Representative Sylvia Thompson introduced House Joint Resolution Number 1 at a special session of the legislature. The bill passed in both houses on January 12, 1920, and it was filed in the Secretary of State's office on January 14, 1920, Oregon's final ratification date. Oregon became the 25th state to ratify the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It takes 3/4 of the states to adopt an amendment. That requirement was reached on August 18, 1920, when Tennessee ratified the amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The 19th Amendment was certified August 26, 1920, and that's the date it became the law of the land, and that's the centennial that we celebrated in 2020. The 19th Amendment joins a list of amendments and actions. You see them there, from expanding the right to vote to men of all races, on to the Native American women given the right to vote, the Voting Rights Act, which undid a lot of the Jim Crow legislation and enabled people to vote, and then finally the one that had roots in a case here in Oregon, allowing those age 18 to vote. So a lot of actions that have expanded and protected the right to vote. New entries were added to the National Votes for Women Trail throughout 2020, and there may be more additions this year. Check it out at this website, ncwhs.org, Votes for Women Trail -2. If you go to that website, you get the map up and you can click on any of those little circles and you'll see the information that has been posted there by people all around the country. And if you're in Portland, when the museums are able to open up once again, check out the exhibit at the Oregon Historical Society. Janice Dilg and her group, the Oregon Women's History Consortium, were in on the development of that exhibit. We didn't leave behind any permanent marks of the centennial here in the Dalles in the fall of 2020. But these young women learned that the suffragists of 1912 and 1920 often would chalk slogans for women's vote on sidewalks. And so they chalked the vote here in the Dalles, the whole block down at our present courthouse, and also right here in front of the library. Well, it's been a great project. Once again, the map has around 2,000 little circles on it. They represent people and events all over the United States. I invite you to take a look at that map and be ready to learn a whole lot about all the things that happened leading up to 1920, all the good reasons that we celebrated this particular centennial.